There is a moment in every INFJ's life when something shifts, quietly, suddenly, and completely. It happens the second they stop caring about fixing people who don't want to change, proving themselves to those who never tried to understand them, or holding together relationships built on one-sided effort. People think INFJs will always be there, always forgiving, always giving, always trying. But when the INFJ finally stops caring, it isn't emotional collapse, it's emotional liberation. Everything about their energy changes, their intuition sharpens, their boundaries harden, their silence becomes purposeful, and the people who once took them for granted finally realize the truth. They've lost someone they will never replace. The INFJ's shift is not dramatic, it's not loud, it's not angry. It's a quiet internal decision, a moment of clarity when they see the reality they've been avoiding. Suddenly, they no longer explain themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They no longer absorb the emotional chaos of those who refuse to take responsibility. They no longer chase after validation, affection, or basic respect. Their love stops flowing where it's not valued. Their empathy retreats from those who drain it. And the INFJ steps into a version of themselves that is stronger, clearer, and more self-protective than anyone expects. They stop caring about what hurts them and start caring about what builds them. Let me ask you something only the emotionally awakened will understand. Have you ever reached that point where you stopped caring and everything in your life became clearer? If you made it to the end, comment, "My shift has begun." So I know you're one of the rare minds who understands this transformation. And don't forget to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your depth, your clarity, and your quiet strength are finally understood. INFJs stop caring when they realize their effort is being taken for granted. An INFJ can pour their heart into someone for months, even years, believing that patience, empathy, and understanding will eventually be reciprocated. They give without keeping score. They support without asking for anything in return. They show up consistently, quietly, and wholeheartedly. But there comes a moment, a subtle, shattering moment, when they finally see the truth. Their effort is not being appreciated, acknowledged, or even noticed. It's being expected, taken for granted, treated as an emotional convenience rather than a rare gift. And for an INFJ, that realization cuts deeper than any argument or betrayal. It flips a switch inside them. The energy they once offered so freely suddenly turns inward, no longer available to someone who never valued it. Inside the INFJ, this shift doesn't happen out of anger, it happens out of exhaustion. They replay conversations, patterns, moments where their needs were dismissed or their boundaries ignored. They see how often they made excuses for someone else's lack of effort, how often they convinced themselves that maybe things will change, how often they watered one-sided connections because they believed in the potential of what could be. But when the INFJ finally recognizes that they're the only one investing, something inside them snaps into clarity. They stop giving emotional oxygen to a place that only suffocates them. They stop offering understanding to someone who doesn't understand them. They stop caring about fixing what was never balanced to begin with. This change is quiet but powerful. The INFJ doesn't announce it. They don't demand apologies. They don't start arguments. They simply withdraw emotionally, almost invisibly at first. Their messages become shorter. Their empathy becomes selective. Their availability fades. Their energy retreats into the parts of themselves they neglected while trying to save someone else. And the person who once depended on their support suddenly feels the absence, an absence that reveals just how much the INFJ was carrying all along. The loss of the INFJ's care is a mirror, exposing the imbalance the other person refused to see until it was too late. And once the INFJ reaches this point, there is no going back. Not because they're stubborn, but because they've learned the cost of giving to someone who only takes. The moment their effort is taken for granted, the relationship shifts from growth to drain, and INFJs refuse to live in that emotional drought anymore. Their heart closes not out of coldness, but out of self-respect. Their care ends not because they stopped loving, but because they stopped abandoning themselves. That is the moment everything changes. For them, and for everyone who never realized how much the INFJ truly gave. Their silence becomes a sign that they're emotionally detaching, not forgiving. When an INFJ goes silent, it isn't peace, it's departure. Their quietness is not an invitation to resume the same cycle, nor is it evidence that everything is fine. It is the first stage of emotional detachment. INFJs don't detach loudly. They don't slam doors, shout, or declare final warnings. They retreat inward, slowly withdrawing the emotional threads that once held the connection together. Their silence is not forgiveness, it's clarity. It means they've seen enough, felt enough, and finally reached the point where caring hurts more than letting go. People misread this silence as patience, as acceptance, as another chance. But in reality, the INFJ is quietly closing the chapter. Inside the INFJ, this silence is born from deep reflection. They replay the moments of disappointment, the broken trust, the repeated patterns, the emotional labor they carried alone. They examine the subtle betrayals, the times they were dismissed, unheard, or taken advantage of, and instead of lashing out, the INFJ withdraws into themselves to protect what remains of their emotional strength. This inward retreat is their way of saying, I'm done participating in something that doesn't value me. They stop explaining, stop defending, stop offering clarity to someone who never listened in the first place. Their silence is not avoidance, it's self-preservation. To those on the outside, their quiet shift can be confusing. They wonder why the INFJ doesn't respond like they used to, why their warmth feels distant, why the emotional connection suddenly feels thin. They may interpret the silence as forgiveness, a reset button, a clean slate, but they are misreading a warning as a welcome. INFJs don't rebuild bridges they've already burned internally. Their silence is the final signal before they emotionally disappear. And by the time someone realizes that silence wasn't patience, the INFJ has already detached beyond recovery. What makes this moment so powerful is its finality. INFJs rarely detach completely, but once they do, nothing can pull them back. Their silence becomes a boundary sharper than any words. It signals the end of emotional investment. The door has not been slammed, it has been quietly locked from the inside, and the person who once could reach them with a single message now finds only distance. When the INFJ goes silent, it isn't reconciliation, it's resolution. It is the calm before they walk away for good. Their silence is the truth they no longer feel obligated to explain. They withdraw their energy from relationships that drain rather than nourish them. INFJs reach a turning point where they finally understand that not every connection deserves their emotional investment. They withdraw their energy from relationships that drain rather than nourish them. It's not sudden and it's not dramatic. It's a quiet reclaiming of power. They begin to notice how much effort they expend trying to maintain a bond that only weakens them, how often they show up for people who never reciprocate, how much emotional weight they carry on behalf of those who give nothing back, and when the imbalance becomes undeniable, the INFJ's withdrawal begins. They no longer pour their empathy into empty spaces. They no longer revive dead conversations. They no longer rescue people who refuse to grow. Their energy returns home to themselves. Inside the INFJ, this shift feels like an awakening. Their intuition starts highlighting the subtle emotional leaks they previously ignored. The friend who only calls in crisis, the partner who takes comfort but never offers it, the family member who demands understanding without giving any. The INFJ sees the patterns clearly now, the draining dynamics disguised as connection. And instead of confronting or accusing, they simply stop feeding these emotional black holes. Their messages slow down, their emotional availability shrinks, their attention sharpens onto people who value them rather than those who consumed them. They're not punishing anyone, they're protecting themselves from depletion that has gone unchecked for far too long. The outside world notices the change but rarely understands it. People may accuse the INFJ of becoming distant, cold, or self-focused. They might wonder why the INFJ isn't as responsive or supportive as before. But what they fail to see is that the INFJ's withdrawal is an act of survival, not spite. You cannot pour from an empty well, and the INFJ has spent years giving until their emotional reservoir ran dry. Pulling back isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the first healthy step toward reclaiming balance, clarity, and strength. And the people who truly care will notice the difference and step up. The ones who only took will simply fade away. And once the INFJ makes this shift, everything in their inner world changes. They feel lighter, clearer, more aligned with themselves. Their energy starts flowing toward people and spaces that uplift them rather than drain them. They thrive in environments where reciprocity exists, where effort is matched, where emotional nourishment goes both ways. This withdrawal is not an ending, it's a beginning. It marks the moment an INFJ chooses their own well-being over the illusion of connection. And from that moment forward, they never again offer their energy to anything that starves their soul. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. There comes a moment in an INFJ's life when they finally understand a painful truth. Some people don't misunderstand them accidentally, they misunderstand them on purpose. These people don't listen to understand, they listen to defend, to twist, to challenge, or to invalidate. And once the INFJ recognizes this pattern, something inside them shifts permanently. They stop explaining themselves, they stop clarifying their intentions, they stop offering emotional transparency to someone who only uses it as ammunition. For the INFJ, this realization is liberation. They no longer try to convince someone who is committed to misreading them. Their explanations turn into silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they finally see it won't change anything. Inside the INFJ, this shift begins with exhaustion, the exhaustion of repeating themselves to someone who never actually hears them. They reflect on the countless conversations where they tried to clarify their feelings, only for those feelings to be dismissed. They remember the emotional labor of trying to explain their boundaries only to be guilt-tripped or ignored. They see how often they tried to make themselves clearer, softer, or more understandable, hoping it would finally lead to connection. But instead, these explanations only revealed a deeper truth. The other person was never listening to understand. They were listening to stay comfortable in their assumptions. And the INFJ, with their deep sensitivity, finally detects the pattern and cuts the emotional cord. To the outside observer, the INFJ's silence may seem cold or sudden, but it is neither. It is clarity taking form. When an INFJ stops explaining, it's because they've finally accepted that no amount of honesty will shift someone who refuses to see beyond their own perspective. They no longer waste energy trying to correct misunderstandings that are intentional. Instead, they redirect that energy inward toward healing, grounding, and reclaiming the parts of themselves they gave away in the name of clarity. They stop participating in conversations that drain them, arguments that belittle them, and emotional dynamics built on imbalance. This silence is powerful. It ends cycles that should have ended long ago. It exposes who truly cared to understand and who only cared to be right. It creates space for the INFJ to reconnect with their truth, without distortion, without judgment, without emotional tug of war. And once they reach this point, they no longer translate their soul for people who refuse to listen. Their silence becomes a boundary stronger than words, a declaration of self-worth. When the INFJ stops explaining, they don't lose their voice, they reclaim it. Their intuition becomes sharper, revealing hidden intentions and toxic patterns. When an INFJ stops caring, their intuition doesn't weaken, it intensifies. Their mind becomes clearer, cleaner, no longer fogged by emotional investment or hope for someone's potential. Suddenly, the patterns they once tolerated stand out in sharp detail. They begin to see the lies between the lines, the manipulation behind the kindness, the insecurity disguised as anger, the selfishness hidden beneath charm. Their intuition, always strong, becomes razor sharp once their heart detaches. What they once explained away now becomes undeniable truth. The INFJ stops caring not because they're cold, but because their inner radar finally reveals the full picture, and the picture is something they can no longer unsee. Inside the INFJ, this sharpening feels like waking up. Their subconscious starts feeding them clues they ignored before. The tone shifts, the passive-aggressive comments, the subtle guilt trips, the way someone always seems to take more than they give. The INFJ begins connecting dots, not emotionally, but analytically. They replay moments where something felt off, but they didn't want to believe it. Now, with emotional distance, the patterns become painfully obvious. They see who drains them and who nourishes them. They see who respects them and who only respects what they can take. They recognize cycles of toxicity they once excused as misunderstandings. Their intuition stops whispering and starts roaring. And this clarity changes everything. People who relied on the INFJ's empathy to mask their own flaws suddenly find themselves exposed. Their excuses no longer work. Their emotional manipulation no longer lands. Their inconsistency is no longer hidden. The INFJ isn't angry, they're simply awake. And once awake, they refuse to participate in the old dynamic. They set boundaries without apology. They detach without guilt. They protect their inner world with a strength no one expected. The INFJ who used to give chances now gives conclusions. The INFJ who used to explain now simply understands and moves on. This sharpened intuition becomes their shield and their guide. It leads them away from relationships that drain their light and toward people who value their depth. It helps them avoid patterns that once trapped them. It allows them to trust themselves more deeply than ever before. When an INFJ stops caring, they stop romanticizing red flags, stop excusing toxicity, and stop abandoning their own needs. Their insight becomes undeniable, their awareness unstoppable. And once that intuition is fully activated, the INFJ can no longer be fooled, manipulated, or held in emotional captivity. Their clarity becomes their liberation, and their liberation becomes irreversible. They rebuild their boundaries and reclaim emotional space they once gave away freely. When an INFJ stops caring, one of the first transformations is the rebuilding of boundaries they once let crumble in the name of compassion, loyalty, or hope. They begin reclaiming emotional space they used to give away without hesitation, space once offered to people who misused their kindness, ignored their needs, or drained their energy. INFJs are naturally generous with their emotional presence, but once they recognize the imbalance, everything changes. They start drawing lines where there were none, closing doors they once kept wide open, and protecting their inner world with a newfound authority. Their boundaries stop being soft suggestions and become firm structures. This rebuilding isn't anger, it's recalibration. It's the INFJ restoring what they've lost. Inside the INFJ, this boundary reconstruction feels like breathing again after holding in air for too long. They look at the areas of their life where they invested too much and received too little. They remember the moments they said yes when their soul whispered no. They recall the times someone stepped over their emotional limits because the INFJ didn't want to disappoint or create conflict. Now, with emotional clarity, they reclaim all of that space. They begin saying no without guilt. They prioritize solitude without apology. They choose where their energy goes with discernment, not obligation. What once felt like selfishness now feels like survival. And slowly, the INFJ realizes how much stronger, clear, and grounded they become when they guard their emotional ecosystem. People on the outside feel the difference immediately. The INFJ who once carried everyone's emotional weight no longer volunteers as the unpaid therapist. The INFJ who once tolerated disrespect now refuses to stay in conversations that belittle them. The INFJ who once absorbed negativity now walks away from it before it sinks into their soul. Some will resent this shift because boundaries disrupt the comfort of those who benefited from the INFJ's lack of them. Others will finally respect the INFJ in a way they never did before. Either way, the INFJ stands taller, not physically, but emotionally. Their boundaries create space for self-worth to breathe. And this reclaim emotional space becomes the foundation of their transformation. It allows them to rest deeply, connect authentically, and grow without being drained by others' chaos. It gives them room to rediscover passions they neglected, relationships that truly nourish them, and parts of themselves they abandoned while trying to save everyone else. Once an INFJ rebuilds their boundaries, they don't return to their old patterns. Their emotional territory becomes sacred, no longer accessible to just anyone, no longer easily surrendered. They reclaim themselves piece by piece, and with every boundary restored, they become someone stronger, wiser, and far more powerful than before. Their transformation is quiet but powerful. Once they stop caring, they never go back. INFJs don't erupt when they reach their breaking point. They don't announce their departure, demand apologies, or throw emotional storms into the world. Their transformation is quiet. It happens internally, in the deep chambers of their intuition and self-awarenessness. The moment they stop caring, everything inside them shifts. The door that once swung open for everyone begins to close softly but permanently. The emotional threads tying them to draining people loosen until they finally snap. And what emerges is not bitterness, but clarity. The INFJ doesn't return to relationships that hurt them, explanations that drain them, or cycles that diminish them. Once they stop caring, the old version of themselves dissolves, and they rise into a version aligned with their worth. Inside the INFJ, this transformation feels like a long exhale they didn't know they needed. The emotional pressure they carried for years begins to lift. The weight of trying to fix everyone, understand everyone, and tolerate everything finally disappears. In its place grows a profound sense of freedom, a calm strength that comes from choosing themselves without guilt. They no longer chase closure, validation, or understanding from people who never offered it. They let silence answer where words once failed. They let distance heal what closeness damaged. Their transformation is not about revenge or punishment. It's about reclaiming the energy they once abandoned for the sake of others. To the outside world, the change is subtle but unmistakable. The INFJ no longer reacts to emotional bait. They no longer overextend themselves in one-sided connections. They no longer forgive the same wounds repeatedly. People who once relied on their softness find themselves facing a silence that cannot be negotiated. People who assumed the INFJ would always return discover they have disappeared into a life where peace matters more than attachment. And those who never appreciated their presence finally understand its value when it's gone. The INFJ evolves quietly, but the impact of their transformation echoes loudly in the lives they leave behind. And the most powerful part, they never go back. INFJs rarely make drastic emotional decisions, but when they do, it's final. They don't reopen doors that led them into darkness. They don't revive connections that drained their soul. They don't shrink themselves to fit where they've outgrown. Their transformation is irreversible because it's rooted in truth, the truth of who they are, what they deserve, and what they will no longer accept. Once an INFJ stops carrying, a new chapter begins, and the old one becomes a lesson, not a home. That quiet transformation becomes their rebirth, and nothing can pull them back into the person they used to be. In the end, the moment an INFJ stops caring isn't a collapse, it's a rebirth. It's the quiet turning point where they reclaim their energy, their clarity, and their emotional independence. They don't announce this transformation, and they don't look back. They simply rise into a stronger version of themselves, one shaped by wisdom rather than wounds. Everything changes: their boundaries, their intuition, their priorities, and their sense of self-worth. The people who once depended on their endless giving finally feel the absence, and the INFJ finally feels peace. This is not the end of their softness, it's the beginning of their strength. Now, let me ask you something only the emotionally awakened will understand. Have you ever reached that point where letting go wasn't losing? It was finally choosing yourself. If you made it to the end, comment "My peace matters," so I know you're one of the rare INFJ minds who understands this transformation. And don't forget to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your depth, your clarity, and your quiet evolution are finally understood.